Thank you. On behalf of the Gruppetto Fund, I'd like to welcome you to the fourth instalment of Off the Wheel, this one known as The Broadcast. Really fortunate today to have Matt Keenan and Robbie McEwan as our primary guests today. Robbie McEwan, obviously one of Australia's ever greatest cyclists, but Matt and Robbie together, because of their commentating prowess, there's nothing they don't know about this game. And so we're going to get a great insight today about cycling prowess as a competitor, but also the world stage of professional cycling. Matt Keenan is not just a young Australian lad who's made good, he is now the premier voice of cycling worldwide. So the second instalment of today is, of course, one of our greatest riders ever, and very few people have represented us on the international stage better than this fellow. So please make welcome to the stage the great Robbie McEwan. Fellas. So we're going to have a look at these two doing what they love, and this is a great way to kick it off.
That perfect in front of us. He did exactly what we said.
6 metres, 7 metres. Matthew Hayman's attacked over the four-time winner to Bone. The other three are looking at each other. Bone is struggling to come back in the wheel. Matthew Hayman is reaching out towards
I don't know about anybody else, and it still brings a tear to my eye to listen to it, to watch it play out again. And
Doesn't get old, does it?
What do you reckon? We just pack up and go home now?
Yeah.
I think it's about the...
Enjoy your lunch. The wine's really good. We'll come back next year. But there's 8 rules of commentary that were written by Richie Benno, and one of them is there's no them or us. And normally Robbie and I were doing the commentary for ASO, so we're doing the world feed. So we're going into Africa, we're going into the US, Northern Ireland, into Canada and so on. So we try and be neutral. For that commentary, it was just for SBS. And when you see the footage at 200 metres to go and Robbie says, he's got to go now, there was an us.
Yeah, I was cheering. You heard me say, go, Matty! I turned into a fan, and I remembered what I was there for in the studio. But I just want to say off the top, the Gruppetto Fund, when I was asked to come and do this lunch, and I was told it's for the Gruppetto Fund, I'd spent my whole career in the Gruppetto. I'm in. I will do it. It's fantastic to be involved in today's lunch. It's a great fundraiser, and we hope that everybody enjoys enough Torbreck to be brave when the auctions come up and to donate as much as you're uncomfortable with, because that's what today's all about. But we hope that we can play our part in partly entertaining you, and if we don't, too bad, you're here anyway, so make the best of it, have an extra drink. What I also was attracted to about this lunch is when Mark said, obviously with the whole COVID situation, no travel, George Hincapie was unable to travel from the US to here, and Mark said, what about, instead of Matt being the MC and interviewing everybody, we take the reins off him. I said, I'm in again. Because Matt likes to be in control, he likes to control where the conversation is going, and he hates talking about himself. And that's exactly what we're going to do for the next few minutes. Because a lot of you know and recognise Matt's voice from TV commentary. He's an unbelievable encyclopedia of cycling knowledge. And if you think that he's sitting in commentary and looking at notes to come out with the stuff he comes out with, it's not true. It's all coming off the top of his head. It's underneath the Lego hair.
We've had the same haircut for 46 years.
And it makes him such a pleasure to work with. But I wanted to let you all get an idea of where Matt's come from, how he got to where he is today and everything in between. Because I often get asked when I'm out and about, the guy you commentate with, Matt Keenan, geez, he knows a lot about cycling. Has he ever ridden? And I said, well, yeah, of course he's ridden. Was he a pro? Well, no, he wasn't a pro, but he's ridden a bike enough to know what he's talking about. So for those here, I guess there's a few here today that are probably also in that basket. You don't know a lot about Matt Keenan, the person, the rider in the past and how he got to where he is. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Excellent.
And there's some nice pictures to go along with it too that are coming up. But Matt, you were a cyclist. I mean, you grew up here in Melbourne, and when you
There's a
were,
couple of
I mean,
photos.
judging by the photo up there where you're sitting aside that brand new bike,
That was
so
Christmas
you're
Day.
you're 6 foot tall, so you're about 7.
Yeah. That was actually Christmas Day and I was 10 years of age, and I've got 4 older sisters and 2 younger brothers, and at that age I knew Santa was a fantasy, but I still wrote a letter to Santa to get a bike because I know that the letter goes to Mum and Dad. And at about 4:30 in the morning I'd done the commando crawl out into the lounge room to see what I got for Christmas, and I saw 2 yellow BMXs and I started sobbing. And then Mum comes down and she says, "What's wrong?" I said, Santa got Peter and David a bike, but I didn't get anything." She turns the lights on and my bike was black, and it was the best day of my life at that point. It was fantastic.
So you wanted to take up cycling from that point. You were
Yeah.
already obsessed with cycling, but without knowing much about the sport, the international side of the sport. When did your passion for cycling and on the international level, Tour de France, etc., when did that ignite?
It was ignited by a guy by the name of Jim Fawcett, who was a family friend. He was a friend of Mum and Dad's, and he was a premiership player in the VFA for Preston. He played district cricket for Paran, and then in his mid-30s, with 5 kids, he took up cycling, and he won a Melbourne and Yarrawonga. And I just thought, this guy's good at everything. How cool's he? He got you covered, Dad. You can't kick the footy like that. So I thought he was great. And then, sadly, he was killed when I was 12 years of age. He was killed riding to work. And his daughter ended up being my childhood sweetheart, and I saw the photos around the house and all those sorts of things. And I had an old bike that I was trying to fix, and before he passed away, he'd come and help me fix it, and I was really inspired by him, and I wanted to be a bike rider. But when he passed away, Mum and Dad are like, it's not happening. You're not going to be a cyclist. That's too dangerous. So I had to fund cycling myself. So I worked at McLeod Tennis Club mowing the lawns for $20. I went to the president of that tennis club, had a block of units, I'd mow the lawns there, and got together enough money eventually to buy a frame, and then I got Jim's old hand-me-down equipment, and then I was in a position to be able to start to go training before school. And then on Channel 9 on a Saturday afternoon, they had Wild World of Sport with highlights packages of the Tour de France, and Phil was commentating. And I can still remember some of the lines. Great Norwegian, Dag got to Lawrence, and he wins the stage to the top of Luzardi Den. He comes through the mist, and Phil says, "Every dag has his day." I was hooked. And then you had John Tesh with that big American voiceover. "Will it be the bespectacled Laurent Fignon who resumes his reign in Paris? Could Pedro Delgado sprout wings in the Pyrenees and fly away with the yellow jersey? And it blows an ill wind for the rest of the peloton when Greg LeMond rides the Tour de France."
So as you can tell, Matt was always destined to be a commentator.
So I was in.
But first things first, you wanted to become a rider. You're obviously obsessed with both things at once. And I can imagine as a kid, more than once you commentated on yourself.
Might have. Kicked a couple of goals as well for Carlton in Rosanna Parklands off a handball from Peter Bazasto. I was pretty good as an 8-year-old on my own in the football ground. But then when I watched that, I dreamt of being the first Australian to win the Tour de France, like LeMond was the first American to win the Tour. And eventually I convinced Mum and Dad to let me race. So I joined the Northcote Cycling Club. And it was in the summer period. So it was track racing in the summer, road racing in the winter. And in November of 1990, I went to the Northcote Velodrome and I rode my first ever races. Borrowed a track bike from the club. And I remember going there, I was so nervous that I forgot to take a spanner to put the front wheel back in the bike, which didn't fit into the car. And I said to the guy handing out the numbers, "Have you got a spanner that I can borrow to put the front wheel in?" He said, "No, I don't, but that guy over there does. His name's Ron Niewand." You know the Niewand name.
The Niewand clan.
The father of Gary Niewand, who was a world champion Olympic silver medalist. And I went over to Ron and I said, "Oh, Ron, can I borrow a spanner to put my..." I actually called him Mr. Niewand. "Can I borrow a spanner to put my front wheel?" And he goes, "What do you want, a 14 or a 15? I would have been happy with multi-grips. I didn't know anything about equipment at that point. "What's it for?" I said, "It's for my front wheel." "You want a 15. "What does that say, son?" "Sid Chrome." "Boomerang, son. Boomerang." I was nervous enough as it was. I've gone out to ride my first race. It was a scratch race. Robbie, I was last. So here's the kid dreaming of winning.
But here's the thing, I reckon you can probably name all the riders that finished in front of you.
Scott Munro won it from the Brunswick Cycling Club.
Enough.
Michael Gallagher was second. His brother Mark was fourth. I can't remember who was third, and I was fifth. I can honestly remember those names. No notes. And then we had a points race. I was last.
Yep.
Lego here. I was last in the points race. Last race was a motor pace, and I was last again. And the cocksure 15-year-old driving home in the car that night with Mum was sitting in the passenger seat thinking, how good is my autobiography going to be when I go from last to first winning the Tour de France?
You've got some front, there's no doubt about it. But going from that experience of coming last in your first races, persevering with cycling, improving, going through the ranks, racing here in Victoria and racing at state level, state titles, etc., and then going on to the national scene where you got some gigs riding for the Australian Institute of Sport, which was our national team in some of those races, and you got to the national level big time. You're racing against the best riders in the country, and this was your chance to try and make the team and get overseas.
Yeah, so I figured that cycling was a sport that actually rewards discipline and hard work. And as you know in my commentary, if I do have one thing, it is reasonable work ethic and pretty disciplined and structured in the way I go about things. So I figured I'm just going to work harder than all the other guys who have actually got talent. And I did try really hard, and I went okay on the road and reached a reasonable level nationally. And then as a 20-year-old, I wanted to try my luck and go overseas, and I went to the Netherlands. I rode for a team based out of Rotterdam. And that was the worst. That photo that's up there on the board at the moment, that's from winning, I think it was the Hamilton 75. It was a 75 mile. It was a handicap race. I was off scratch, and I got hooked Robbie McEwan style by a guy, Darren Gowding. He got disqualified, and I got to win it. It was great. I probably wasn't going to beat him anyway.
As so I didn't said, a win's a win.
Yeah, exactly. So then I went to the Netherlands as a 20-year-old, and I think my best result, incidentally, that photo there is one of my favourite results, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. I think my best result was 7th in a Kermesse in Belgium. Like, I got my backside handed to me. And there's a Kermesse in Belgium. I'm the guy in the white at the back, and you can see my body language, Robbie.
Head between the shoulders, almost up your bum.
Yep.
And that is what a lot of young Aussies who go over to experience European racing, a lot of them go to Belgium for the first time. It's really accessible. There's a race on every day of the week. They get over, they live in really squalid conditions. They're doing it on the cheap, and they ride to the races. They're helped out by someone who, out of the goodness of their heart, and who also has a rental property, they pile all these cyclists into, and they get them to the races, and they end up in that very position for a while, and then they're off the back. They stay in that position on the bike for a little while longer, then they pull out, and they get downhearted about the whole cycling thing, and this is not for me. Yeah. But you changed tack then after experiencing that.
Exactly. So that was at 20 years of age, and I'd mucked around at school because I was going to win the Tour de France. Why did I need school? Huh? What did Mr. Pezzameni know? And then I came back and I realised that I actually needed to get an education. So as a 21-year-old, I went and did VCS. I did year 12 at TAFE. And I set myself a bunch of objectives. And I wrote a plan, Robbie. You'd be surprised. I had to get a certain amount of results, win a couple of Opens, which are like national level races in Australia, finish in the top 10 in what was the Tattersalls Cup. That was a qualifying series for the Herald Sun Tour. Finished top 10 at the national championships and ride the Sun Tour. And I managed to achieve those things. And I actually, having an objective when I was at school, actually went okay. It went a lot better than I did the first time around. And that was the opportunity then to say, okay, I proved myself, I can go overseas again. But one of the results that I'm probably proudest of was at the National Championships in 1996. That was the first year that there was under-23s at the World Championships. And we spoke about a guy before, Eddie Salas, who's an unheralded guy from Australian cycling from the 80s and the 90s. He was 6th at the Olympics in the road race in Seoul, rode the Giro d'Italia and so on. And I kind of measured my race on him. I followed him around, got in the breakaway, winning breakaway in the end, and there was 8 of us in the break. There was me and Eddie Salas and 6 guys from the AIS. And Eddie goes, you follow those 3, I'll follow those 3. And we had Dean Rogers was in the breakaway. His brother Michael won 3 world titles, rode the Tour de France. Rod McGee was in the move. His brother was an Olympic Games gold medalist, and Rod himself was a world champion. There was Damien McDonald was in the breakaway, rode the Olympics that year in Atlanta, was tragically the guy that was killed in the Burnley Tunnel. Brett Dennis, who I think he beat Lance Armstrong in a time trial in the Tour de Pont, so he was a reasonably good bike rider.
For an Aussie Nationals, when you look at what guys had done to that point, it was a stacked field, and you were there.
And Nick, your old mate, Nick Gates, was in there. And Nick Gates ended up winning the race. I went across the line in 6th position, but I was the first under 23. So I thought maybe I might be a chance to make the Australian team for the World Championships. I didn't get selected, and at the time I was obviously really disappointed. And on reflection, the selectors absolutely made the right choice. I wasn't in the top 6, I was just in the top 6 on that day. But my coach gave me a really good lesson that day because I was moping around a little bit afterwards, and he said, life is 90% what happens to you, 10% what you do about it. What are you going to do about it? So I wanted to ride the Herald Sun Tour. That was the biggest race in Australia at the time before the Tour Down Under started. There was a qualifying series for that. Had to finish top 10. I finished 5th. I was equal 5th with Matt Wilson, who rode the Tour de France a couple of times and won an Australian title. Then I rode the Herald Sun Tour that year. There's a photo of me in the Herald Sun Tour sitting behind Tony Hughes, affectionately known as Beaker. And your old mate, Bobby Phillips, is there as well.
Jason, yeah.
He's in the photo. And I managed to do that. And in the Herald Sun Tour, I was never going to win a stage sprinting against somebody like Robbie, so I had to try and get myself into a breakaway. And there was one day where we were going up Mount Buffalo, and it's an area that I know really well. So you start in Wangaratta, go over to Wonga Gap, and up Mount Buffalo, and I love that area. So I spoke to another mate of mine, Hayden Bradbury. I said, let's get in the break. You attack, I'll follow. And he said, okay, we'll go after the intermediate sprint. So we're coming towards the intermediate sprint, and I'm behind Hayden, and Robbie is in front of us, and there was this Italian guy, Roberto Gaggioli, who called himself the winningest cyclist in the world. But he counted the sprint to the signpost when he was out training with a mate. And he's up alongside Robbie, and Robbie's in like second gear talking to him. Is that all you got, Gadge? Is that it? Meanwhile, I'm full gas trying to hold on. He's talking to this bloke, beating him in the sprint.
Yeah. Well, it didn't
What did you say to him?
Well, it didn't just start like that because this guy Gaggioli, he came in with this bravado of, I'm the winningest rider in the world. And I'd won a stage, I think, day or 2 days before, and Gadge had been, he said it. It wasn't just he got quoted as. He said, yeah, but that Robbie, he ain't that fast. So we had this intermediate sprint, and he was going for it, and I was going for it, and then he opened up his sprint, and he got to 100% effort. So I just pulled up alongside him and said, "Is that it?" And then rolled him in the sprint. And then straight after that sprint, I was like, taught him a lesson. Boom, down the left-hand side, and it was Hayden Bradbury with Matthew Keenan in the wheel. Being a sprinter has just made a full 90% effort in the intermediate sprint. I was like, you bastards. Because it always makes the race go quick, and you hope they just go straight away. But you got in the break.
Yeah, and for a guy like me, that was my opportunity really to make any sort of an impact on the race. And I didn't want to go through it anonymously. Like, in the Tour de France, I'm always impressed with somebody who gets in the break and at least we're mentioning their name. And I was really conscious of that. And there was some good riders in the breakaway. Roger Hammond was in the breakaway. A couple of years later, he finished 3rd in Paris-Roubaix. A few other guys who had ridden the Tour of Spain that year. It was good. We got caught about 5Ks, I think, up Mount Buffalo, and Josh Collingwood rode past us on the big chain ring, just motoring away, and there was about 6 guys left. And I was happy to sort of get there and prove to myself I can justify going overseas one more time. And then I managed to get a spot on a club in France. It was Club Olympique Multisport Argenteuil. That's a photo of me in the pink jersey from that team. And there's a trophy from one of 2 races, Robbie, that I won in Europe. But when I went there, I said, okay, I'm now 22 years of age. You've got to make some pretty quick progress. You've got to win 4 races. If you don't win 4 races, you come home and you go to university, or you win 4 races and you give yourself another go. And I didn't win 4, I won 2.
And having known you now for a number of years, he sticks to the plan. He always sticks to the plan, unless I'm in control, like I often am behind the wheel of the car when we're leaving a Tour de France finish. But you came back home and you went into the workforce, and yeah. I guess your first jobs, you were in the field of PR, marketing, corporate affairs. In a way, it set you up for the job that was still to come.
Yeah, it did, and I came home knowing what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to write speeches for politicians, because Yeah, don't laugh
Yeah,
at me.
it's-
Yeah. Come on,
That was my
Come on,
reaction too
table
when he
12.
told me his
What a-
life story.
What about a little bit of love? But just going back to that, I won 2 races. The first race that I won when I was there, it was in a race where we started in point A, we went to point B and then did a couple of circuits. And we were in a leading group of about 12. The circuit was about 5 Ks around. And by bell lap, there was 2 of us left, and it was me and a teammate. And it was about my 6th or 7th week there, and nobody had spoken a word of English to me up until that point. And then we're working turns, and a teammate rides past me and he says, "I want to win." Like, fuck, he speaks English. I said, "I want to win too." And he said, "Oh, this is the village where my family come from. My grandparents are here, my parents are here. Your English is really good." And I said, "I want to win too." And then he goes, "No, I want to win." And then he stopped working. He was sitting behind me. I said, "Mate, I flew Garuda, Indonesia to get here. I want to win." And he stopped working. And I thought, we're going to get caught. And we could see them coming. I said, "Okay, you win, but I get the prize money for first and second." He said, "Okay." So he started working. And then my bike handling skills weren't Robbie McEwan-esque. They weren't awesome. But there was a tight right-hand corner with about 500 to go. And his bike handling skills were worse than mine. I said, "You take us to the corner and I'll lead you out through to the finish line." Okay. So we're coming towards that corner, and I thought, I might not get another chance to win a race in Europe. So I gave him a little bit of distance. I took a run at him at the corner. I ducked up the inside, look over the shoulder. He's 10 lengths back. I'd never looked behind again. He came across the finish line. He was talking French.
And now you can see why Matt was suited to writing speeches for politicians, because the lies started early.
So I realised I wasn't good enough, and I came home and I went to university.
So you came out, you got a job, you're working in PR, you're working in corporate affairs, you were writing speeches for politicians. Tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them,
Correct.
get out.
Yeah.
And then, but you still had a passion for cycling. You still had a passion for cycling commentary, most obviously. You're following the tour. You were liking what you heard. You probably, I don't know, maybe stopped commentating on yourself by then, but you were...
I was only 24. Why would I?
Okay. Where did you get the first in for cycling commentary? How did it happen? I mean, we know where you are now, but how do you start that coming out of corporate affairs?
It's Table 18's fault. Adam Murchie, you're to blame. For anybody that says that I send them to sleep in commentary, it's Adam's fault. So there was an advertisement, and I wanted to stay involved in the sport, and that yellow jersey that you saw me in before, that was the last race that I ever rode, that I really wanted to win. That was 2 years after I'd stopped the dream of becoming a pro cyclist. But there was a race, the Northern Suburbs 3-day tour, and I had an honour roll with the Sansonetti brothers who had ridden Olympics and carried the flag for Australia at the Commonwealth Games. Michael Wilson had won that race. He'd won a couple of stages at the Giro d'Italia. Marcel Gono beat Cadel Evans in the race one year. It was a really prestigious honour roll in the Northern Suburbs, and I wanted to win that. And I won that in '99. That was the last race I ever rode. And then afterwards, the honour roll's been embellished a bit more because Mitch Docker then won it, Will Walker won it, and Luke Platt has since won it, and Luke Platt might win an Olympic Games gold medal this year. But then I still wanted to stay involved in the sport, and I wasn't going to be a coach because that means other people are depending on you, and I wanted to really focus on my career. Certainly wasn't going to be a commissaire. And then an ad came up for a volunteer commentary job with Cyclist International across the road here at John Cain Velodrome, or whatever it was known at the time. I thought, that'd be fun. I'll go and do that. And a few of my mates encouraged me because I talked too much when we were watching a bike race. I'm the middle child in a family of 7. Of course, I talk too much. And I walked into the interview room, and this merch, you had 12 people around the table for a job nobody was getting paid for. Come on. And Robert Crowe, only 10. Robert Crowe had gone in before me to do the interview. And he was a really good cyclist. He was Australian champion, went to the Olympics in Barcelona and so on. He walked out, I walked in. First question they say is, "We've just had Crowe in here. He was a much better bike rider than you. What can you possibly add to the commentary that he can't?" Fair question. Who was a better bike rider? Phil Anderson or Paul Sherwin? Phil Anderson.
Phil was a better bike rider.
Who was a better commentator? Paul Sherwin or Phil Anderson? Paul Sherwin's one of the greats. And then Stewie Doyle, who was the lead commentator, said, "We'll give this guy a go." And both Crowe and I went that first night. and I can remember it vividly. Lee Howard won the under-15 races. He won all 3 races in the under-15s. It was the Melbourne Cup on wheels, and the winner of the race was Richard England, whose nickname was Dick London, and he won off the mark of 80 metres. And I can remember most of the other races as well, and I was bitten by the bug. And I thought, maybe there's more than one way to skin a cat. So sure, I'm not going to ride the Tour de France. I'm definitely not going to win it. But maybe I can get there some other way.
So from there, I mean, starting at the velodrome over the road to the Tour de France, it's a hell of a long way.
Yeah.
Take us quickly through the steps. How do you get from there to there?
Okay, so you never know when the opportunity is going to arise. So you've got to be ready for when it does. So what I did from that moment is I volunteered for every commentary gig I could possibly do. And I would drive to Leongatha to do a junior carnival. I remember commentating at junior carnival under-15s in Warragul with Simon Clark, Pat Shaw and Mitch Docker racing against each other, and Pat Lane being lippy to the commentator already as a 14-year-old. And I did community radio. I then managed to get a radio show up on SEN, and I just wanted to get as much experience as possible. I knew that Phil Liggett was coming to Australia to commentate on the Bay Crits, so I contacted John Trevorrow, said, I want to come and commentate on the Bay Crits. I'll do the support races, I'll pay for my accommodation, I'll pay to get there. So I went to those races and I did the support races, and once the elites came on, I handed the microphone over to Phil. And I just wanted to get as much experience in the bank as possible, so if one day that window opened, I was ready. And you're far better off making your mistakes in front of a small audience than a big one. So you can start to hone your craft. And then it was the second year, the last day of the Bay Crits where Phil was there, and it was at South Bank. I think Scott McGrory won, you were in the race, and Phil said, why don't you come up and commentate with me on the last day in the elites? So I got to work with Phil, and obviously I was nervous about that, but really respectful of Phil, and made sure I didn't stand on his toes. If there was a local guy that he didn't know anything about, I handed him notes, or I jotted down a note with a stat on that guy so he had something to say about him. And Phil took a liking to me at that point and kind of took me a little bit under his wing. I thought, I need him on my side and I need Paul Sherwin on my side. So for the radio show that I was doing on SEN, I started to get Paul Sherwin on the show as a guest regularly. So I built a relationship with him before I met him through the radio. And that, I went on for around about 5 years going to commentating on gigs without getting paid a single cent for any of them, and often I was out of pocket. And then in 2007, the Tour of Qatar clashed with the Tour of California. And the company that owns the Tour de France, they were producing the broadcast for the Tour of Qatar. They contacted Phil and Paul. They said, we're not available, we're doing the Tour of California. Okay, who do you recommend? We recommend this guy in Australia, Matt Keenan. They'd never heard of him. But you get the recommendation from Phil and Paul, ASO is going to take you.
There's your window.
There's your window. I say, it was 2 weeks' notice that I needed to be there. I went into my boss and I said, 2 weeks' time, I won't be here. I'm off to Qatar. And if they said no, I was prepared to resign to go and take that opportunity, but they were really supportive of me. My boss was fantastic. And then I got there and they said, this is the audition for you to be the lead-up act to Phil and Paul at the Tour de France. So they'd had a different commentator for the previous 3 years and they weren't happy with that commentator and they'd moved them on pretty quickly. So if everybody remembers the scene from The Castle when Dennis Denuto was going to the High Court of Australia, that was me. I was shitting myself. And the first day didn't go well. That red light goes on, and when you're nervous, you talk too much. And then at the end of the day, we were around the dinner table, and I said, oh, how do you think it went? We had some technical problems. We didn't really get a chance to listen to you. Fantastic. And then they gave me no feedback. You know what they're like. They gave me no feedback. And I got home, I got an email, are you available to come to Paris-Nice? Absolutely. So I went back into the boss and said, I'm off to France in a couple of weeks. No problem. And then I did that, and then I got a message a couple of weeks later, are you available to come and commentate on the Tour de France? So the 2007 Tour de France was my first time commentating at the Tour de France. And it was in London, the opening prologue, and they told me, we're not sure how long you'll be on air, but from the start of the broadcast, you'll be on air, and then you'll throw to Phil and Paul once the Americans are ready to take it live. So I had done preparation to be ready to be on air just in case for around about 3 hours. The 10 ticks down, screen opens up, I say hello, do the welcome. About 45 seconds in, Matt Keenan to throw to Phil and Paul in 5, 4, 3.
And that went on for
10 years.
6 or 7, 8, 10 years. So it went on for a long time. I mean, I used to, when I retired, I'd tune in and I'd get to hear the feed that we had here, and I'd hear Matt come on. I get to hear what he's like, and it was like that quite often. 3 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 20.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got half an hour, and then you had to throw to Phil and Paul. But you're always there on your own. You're like the third. You were the third wheel, the spare dick at a wedding. Call it what you want.
Who's been at one of Robbie's family weddings?
That's what it was. But
Yeah.
then you were doing lots of other gigs. You were doing SBS. You were doing the classics. We did the Giro together for SBS, and we were starting to get our thing going on. But the Tour de France was that elusive. We both wanted to be there.
Absolutely.
You wanted to be there for much longer.
Yeah.
I sort of came out of the sport from racing, and then it was like almost happened by accident. I got asked to do some commentary. Go in, make a few comments. I went, I'm always up to do that. I'll get a drink in my hand, I'll come in, I'll make a few comments, a few smart-ass remarks, and I'm out, and it'll be good. And it was fun. I did it with Phil and Paul.
Yeah.
It was super easy. I mean, you just sit there and just let them do what they do. They ask you a question, you answer it, and you sit back and wait for the next one. And then I got to come and work with you, and we did some commentary together. And then that dream started of being a duo and being able to go to the tour.
Yeah, and for me, even though I got to commentate on the tour 10 times doing that lead up and then thrown over to Phil and Paul, and incidentally, the more boring the stage was, the longer I got to commentate. And it was pretty hard being in the public eye, commentating on your own, on the boring part, being compared to two of the greatest broadcasters of all time who actually got to talk to each other and commentate the stage finishes. Now, one of my favourite pieces of criticism was, you're not conversational enough.
They get it. A bit hard when you're on your own.
Exactly.
But you do your best, and the worst thing you can do in TV commentary is be quiet for too long.
Yeah.
Because people think you might have passed away on air or something really awkward.
So I bet again, you know how organised I am, you haven't seen these notes, but when I was on my own, I'd put 3 dot points on the screen. 1 point at a time, so you finish your point. Number 2 was light and shade, and number 3 was add value to the pictures, which is what you do incredibly, better than anybody else in the world in any language. Don't tell people what they're seeing, tell them why they're seeing it. And that's what I tried to focus on. I knew I couldn't compete.
I'm going to write that down for myself because I didn't know I was doing that. So I'm just.
No, I couldn't compete with Phil and Paul, so don't try and be them. Be you. Because it's no good trying to make a living as a musician being Babba. Try and be the original ABBA. Don't be a cover band. And I just wanted to do it my way. And there's going to be people who don't like me the same way as there's people who don't like some band that's really successful. It's a flavour thing. So I just focused on trying to do my thing. And then when I got the opportunity to work with you, I always knew we were going to work together, even when you were still racing. Because the amount of times that I interviewed you, and you were always really generous with your time with me, which I greatly appreciated.
I liked my own stories, and I just wanted to be able to tell it.
But your insights were fantastic, and you were the best at articulating what was happening in the race. And now, getting that opportunity to call with you is absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you about the Tour of Flanders in a moment. But then when we got asked in 2006 to take over the commentary, I told 2016, sorry, I told ASO no, that it would be too much of a change, and my vision was that we'd make it a slow, gradual change. So what they did that year is we commentated up until 40 Ks to go, and then we handed over to them. And then the following year, we got to call the stage finishes. It was in Dusseldorf, and it was, the pouring rain, opening prologue, and Robbie and I had dinner the night before, and he says, "Okay, Keno, I need you to know one thing. I don't do schedules." And I'm like, "We've got one thing. If you'll just get the start when the race starts, when the broadcast starts, that'd be good." So we worked out how we were going to be able to work together and travel together. And obviously, I was a lot more nervous than you in terms of filling the shoes. You're never going to fill their shoes, but be that next voice. I
remember what you said coming in. Like I maybe didn't see it the same way. I'd heard a lot of Phil and Paul commentate on the tour, and I used to watch it in the early 90s before I went away and started racing overseas. And once I got away in the mid-90s, I had not seen an English-speaking commentary of Tour de France until I got back to Australia
Yeah.
in 2012. So although I knew Phil and Paul, I knew they're great, the voices of cycling, I still had a great amount of respect, but you sort of had another take on it because they've been there the whole way as their popularity and their audience grew. And I said, hey, how good's this? We're going to come in and we get the gig. And you say, I just feel like the guy who shot Bambi. Because and it was only then at that moment it sort of dawned on me like, oh, actually, yeah, this is a bit of a big deal. We're taking over the role. And that's when I got nervous.
Yeah, I'm glad I got you nervous for a change. That was the first. And then but that day, being able to call a stage finish of the Tour de France for the first time, I felt like it had been probably almost a 15-year apprenticeship to get to call that stage finish. And when I look back at the kid that went to that race in 1990 in November and was nervous about asking for a spanner, I was actually pretty proud of myself to get there and do that. It was pretty cool. Yeah. And then at the end of the race, remember when we walked into Paris on the last day? And I was walking down the Champs-Élysées and they got the big screens up and they're playing the highlights from the Tour de France from that year. And I couldn't see it yet, but I could hear the commentary, and it was a mix of the French commentary and the English commentary, and it was you and me. I was walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
Like this.
Might have. And that was pretty cool. To be able to achieve that, I was pretty happy that day, I can assure you.
Yeah, well, even though I work with you and you might expect it, you've made it. You have made it to the absolute top. And I feel privileged to be part of that journey because I sort of came out of racing and fell into a bit of commentary and I just hitched my wagon on and basically answer questions, talk about the stuff that I know about because I raced it.
Yeah,
but you do the work and I float along and add.
No, you actually
whatever it is
undersell
I
that.
add.
So Dale Carnegie, the guy who wrote the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, he wrote another book about doing public speaking as well. And he said, you shouldn't be too nervous talking in a public environment if you've earned the right to talk on the topic. And you say that you turn up and you haven't done all that much research. Well, you haven't done that much research in the hour leading up to it because you're too busy falling asleep and me ringing you to make sure you're on time.
I'm out riding, mostly.
But you've been doing decades of research.
Yeah.
Because we commentate on the Tour of Flanders, and there's information that Robbie can tell you that no amount of research online is going to be able to bring you. Well, they'll be coming into a right-hand corner before they hit a cobbled sector, and Robbie will say, the shortest line through is on the right, but there's a pothole, you need to actually go a little bit to the left, because he's trained on all those roads. The helicopter goes up, and he says, oh, that house on the left, that's my mother-in-law. We're going down the street where I used to train, there's a really good coffee shop on the right. That's been your research. And then you go to the Tour de France, and there's a technical sprint finish, and if something happens where there's been a crash or there's been a disqualification, we'll walk into the commentary box and there'll be Danish television, Dutch television, Belgian television, French television. When's Robbie get here? They want to ask Robbie what happened because he's the authoritative voice on those things and what happens. And part of the combination of what we do when we're on the ground, we didn't get to do it last year and we won't get to do it again this year, is I drive to the finishes and Robbie rides.
In fact, Matt, apart from being a fantastic commentator, he's a very good soigneur. Because as we make our way around France, there's a hell of a lot of driving to be done. We go from finish to finish. After the stage finishes, we're on to the next one. So say, on average, a 300-kilometre drive to the next place. I generally do the driving. I let Matt drive on the freeways because it stops me getting tickets. And it's pretty straightforward. All the technical stuff where it saves a lot of time if you break a couple of little rules. I do that bit. But getting there then the next day from our hotel to the actual finish of that day, sometimes I put my own bag in the car, but quite often Matt will carry it downstairs for me and put it in the car, and he'll drive through to the finish to start doing all his prep and his hours of preparation. I'll see you when I get there, and I'm on the bike, and I ride the last part of the stage. But
that's actually invaluable. So when you're driving in, you get sent off course and you can't necessarily drive the finish line. You don't get quite the feel for it. But when Robbie rides the last 20 kilometres, why don't you ride up to the top of Alpe d'Huez? But when Robbie does the last 20 Ks, particularly when there's a technical sprint finish, we know more than any other commentary team, because the other co-commentators, they're not doing that. They're getting to the finish and they're having a long lunch. Actually, there's one other guy that does it. And it's the guy that I grew up idolising, not because he was the best bike rider, but because he was the smartest bike rider. A Danish guy called Rolf Sorensen, who was one of your teammates. And before you got there, actually, when I was doing that commentary on my own, the guy I spoke to every day before I went on air was Rolf, to ask him what was going to happen. And he was like Nostradamus. So Robbie does that and he brings that extra information to the commentary that adds value to the pictures, because you can't find that out online. You can't Google the wind on that last corner, the right spot to be, and invariably you're right.
Sometimes.
So that's what we do as a combination. So you want to pick somebody that fills in your goals, your gaps, I should say. And the other thing that Robbie does is he helps me relax a lot more. Whatever region we go to, he makes sure that we eat the local dish, we have the local wine, and generally we get to the restaurant and I hand him the wine list and say, what do I like on that? And he knows exactly what to order. And that actually helps me enjoy it a lot more, and that makes me more relaxed on air, and I'm able to share a little bit more personality and tell a few more stories when the boring stuff is happening. So can I turn the tables on you now?
I knew it was going to happen eventually.
So I want to tell you a story about Robbie driving. Coming off the mountains, he always drives the evacuation off the mountain. And there was one day where we could hear the gendarmes coming in the distance, and we're stuck in traffic. And Robbie just...
We're talking nose to tail, a traffic jam that is as long as the mountain is, plus a bit extra off the bottom. So 20k traffic jam, it will literally take you 3 to 4 hours to get off some of these mountains after a Tour de France stage, completely blocked. So I just start driving in the lane that's empty, that may or may not have cars coming in the opposite direction, until I hear
the
sirens, and that's my signal that things are about to get a lot better.
And he's like Pavlov's dog hearing a bell. Like, he lays off the car in front and he slots in behind the gendarmes and he's right on their hammer. And there was one time we're going down a mountain and there was a car between Robbie and the police, and the car was creating a little bit of a gap, and he thought it was a sprint finish. And he's on the horn at this car to close the gap.
They were losing the wheel.
He has a look up the inside on one roundabout, he has a look over the other side. We get to the bottom of the mountain, we've saved around about an hour, and the police have stopped the convoy and they've pulled us over. It's the first time I've ever been pulled over in my life. I'm panicking. I look across at Robbie, it's Tuesday. Like, no reaction at all.
Yeah, but he looked at me and he got more panicked that I wasn't panicked. And he said, now we're really fucked. I said, what are they going to do? He said, I don't know, and that's the problem.
So the police officer takes our accreditation, he takes photos of it, and Robbie asks him what he's going to do. He says, you'll find out tomorrow morning at the start. Robbie nods. We never go to the start, we never go to the finish line. He says to me, how long you reckon that cost us? 2 minutes? 58 in front. So we take off, and now we're on the freeway, and it's 130, and we're behind the convoy of police once again. And Robbie's not happy with 130. He sits behind them for about 5 minutes, and then the cruise control goes to 138. That was about what you thought you could get past, and you drove straight back past the police. And then there was one other incident that was similar to that. Again, the gendarmes are coming down, they're on the horn, and Robbie lays off, and he throws a massive hook, and he gets in the convoy, and he looks in the rear view mirror behind us, and Greg LeMond is in the car behind us, the American who won the race 3 times. He was in the passenger seat, admittedly, but Robbie looks back, he goes, LeMond, yellow jersey, green jersey. Always a racer.
Who said I couldn't compete in the mountains?
So going back to that famous stage in a Canterbury, when we were here and we were watching that stage and Robbie was winning, the competitor came out once again. The 2 things that he said to me as that video was rolling, Robbie Hunter, what an idiot. He went too early. Geez, I gave Vincenzo a massive hook. Who was it? Ventoso. That was arguably your most spectacular win, yeah?
Yeah, if I ever get asked what's my favourite win of my career, I do think that I go back to 99. I won my first tour stage on the Champs-Elysees. It was my 3rd tour, the first one I'd won. It was unbelievably exciting. I've had others against the odds. It didn't look like I was going to win, and I've had some good wins, but that takes the cake. It was, okay, I won the race. but everything that led up to it, what you didn't see in the video is I was involved in a crash with 20 kilometres to go. And by the time I got up and got going, we were around a minute 20 behind. And at the same time, my two biggest rivals for the sprint in that tour, Tom Bonen, the Belgian, and Daniele Benatti, an Italian, their team directors had heard who was involved in the crash. McEwan's down on the radio. Boys, McEwan's crashed, he's off the back, go. So both teams working together as hard as they could to make sure it didn't come back. Because the year before, I'd towed them up in the sprints. I'd won 3, won the green, and they thought, great opportunity, he ain't coming back. So they started riding. I had one rider with me, and I was still swearing and just saying, let's forget it, it's over, we're never coming back. We got about a kilometre further, and there were 4 more teammates from my Lotto team. It was like the cavalry had arrived, but I thought, nice gesture, we're still never coming back. And we were still at a minute, and by that time it was 16k to go, and we could see the end of the convoy of cars. I thought, well, if we can get back on, maybe I can salvage a few points, run a top 20, maybe, if I can get to the front. We ended up coming through the convoy. We got onto the back of the peloton with 5 kilometres to go. I'd used every teammate. So we're on the back, 5k to go. I thought, all I've got to do now is pass 180 guys, roughly, on this winding little run into Canterbury, all these roundabouts. And I thought to myself, well, no perfect excuse. We've had a crash. Nobody expects you to be competitive. Nobody expects you to even be here. So they're going to be surprised if you can get to the front. And I thought, just take every single risk and don't hold back. I saw gaps all the way in. At one point when there wasn't a gap, I realised I knew the guy's name, little Spanish guy. I was like, hey, Manuel, in my best accent. And he thought it was one of his mates, and he just moved to the side, and I was straight through. I think in one roundabout I passed 20 guys. Don't know what happened behind me, but I passed 20 guys in that roundabout. I got back to around 20th position with a kilometre to go. And it's like that line out of Dumb and Dumber, it's 1,000,000 to 1. So you're telling me there's a chance. And at that point, I'd been riding on pure anger until that point, that I'd fallen, that the other teams had ridden against me. And once I got to that point, I said to myself, go back to the original plan. I'd actually had a dream about that finish, which I'd never done about any bike race before, about how I was going to win there and how it was going to happen. And I actually said to myself, ride the dream. And as it all panned out, and there was a little rise, slight left, couldn't see the finish to 150 metres to go, when Robbie Hunter attacked, and I thought, this is great. Everybody else reacted to it, and they sort of made a sprint to follow the attack. And I just kept riding the same tempo. I probably lost 5 or 6 spots as I drifted back. And as the inevitable happened, his attack sort of petered out because he went from so far to go. Nobody else wanted to go at that point because it was still 300 to go, and I started moving back forwards. And then somebody else in front of me went. They started to make a charge just to get to the front. I said, free lead out time, here we go. And knowing that you couldn't see the finish yet, as bike riders, we're not that clever. Show us something, we'll go for it. Can't see it yet, ooh, I don't know. And I just knew, I know as soon as I come out of that bend, we'll see it. And I was coming on the right-hand side, and I was from outside to inside. I started my sprint before all the others, came outside to in. As I crossed over, they were accelerating out of the bend, which took them left to right. So everybody missed the wheel as we crossed over. I was then 4 lengths in front, and then I had to snap myself out of it because I had that sudden moment of, oh shit, I'm going to win. And then you have all these, a million thoughts run through your head. I said, just stay concentrated to the line. I was dying 1,000 deaths. And I never realised that I was 4 or 5 lengths in front. I had no idea. I just said, just make it to the line. And just trying to concentrate and get it right. I've had a lot of other sprints where I've had time to think about, well, what will I do at the line when I win this one? I had different celebrations, some stupid, some quite cool.
Just quietly?
Just quietly. More stupid ones than cool ones, to be honest. But that day I got to the line. Not only I had nothing prepared, I hardly realised I got to the line. I suddenly got there and thought, I'd do something. And I just sat up and sort of went, shit. It was such a surprise, not just to everyone else, but to me more than anyone. But the thing was that it was the way I rode the sprint, I'm very proud of it. It worked out. It was against the odds, but without my whole team, bar, Cadell was riding GC and one guy to stay with him, the rest of the team came back for me and brought me back into the race. So that section between 20 and 5K to go, lucky there was a camera there that they sort of got a reward for what they did. It's that type of stuff you often don't see. And I just appreciate it so much what those guys did to get me in a position to then do something against the odds. And that's why it had that adventure feel about it. Indiana Jones win.
There's two more moments in your career I want to ask you about. One of them is another stage victory, and it's at the Giro d'Italia, given that we're commentating on the Giro now, and you'll be joining me on Saturday.
Tomorrow night.
You've managed to come in for the high mountains.
Yep.
Perfect. It was pouring rain, and there was a tight left-hand corner with around about 400 metres to go.
Or even less. It was a pure Giro finish.
It was the most dangerous approach to the finish line you could possibly hope for. It was Robbie's sweet spot.
Yeah, so we were up near Venice, I don't know how many days in. It was around 10 days into the race, or 12 days in, something like that, in a place called Sandona di Piave. And the stage completely flat, breakaway of three of the small Italian teams off the front. We ended up catching them, came onto a circuit. But all the way into the finish, we could see the clouds building. It just went completely black in front of us like a massive tidal wave. And we knew it was going to be raining at the finish. And sure enough, it just hosed it down. There was this much water on the road in places on the finish circuit, and it was getting quite slippery. Because as you know, in Italy, in some places, it doesn't rain often. When it does, it buckets down and it just becomes soapy. It's so slippery. And we got onto that circuit and I saw the finish. The last corner was a high-speed left-hander and it was about at 180 metres to go. And we got there in the wet and I went, I'm winning today. Even though Mario Cipollini was dominating the race, had his whole team on the front, and they're actually trying to slow everybody down in the corners. And I was with a teammate, Nick Gates, and I said, let's just do a bit of a tester. We'll ride to the front going a bit quicker and just see what happens. We might have crashed, but we're going to get a good idea of if we could go quicker than everybody else. And incidentally, we were riding Continental tyres, and in the wet, they were the best. We came through this corner, we were suddenly 40 metres in front, not 4 lengths, 40 metres out of this corner. I said, all right, I know how I'm going to tackle the finish. And as Mario's team lined up, we come through the last kilometre, high speed, 65k an hour, come into all this last corner. I thought, they've left room up the inside, that's a bit of me. I accelerated down the inside, past Mario, who thought he'd seen a ghost, because he thought no one's going to come past at this speed, let alone into a corner like that. I led into the corner, Mario went to follow me, and a guy on the inside of him, Galvez, a Spaniard, he lost it, took Mario out, about 25 other guys crashed in the same corner, all washed out, except one little Aussie bloke who came racing through the corner, and I won in a breakaway. And from my whole career, it was my one and only solo win.
One more story before we wind it up, and this to me actually typifies Robbie more than any of those victories. We talk about the Gruppetto Fund. This is about the Gruppetto, and he was pretty much the only guy in it. So in 2007, when he won that stage in Canterbury, you had pretty significant injuries on the back of that crash, despite winning. Then the race went into the mountains, and there was a stage to Tin, high mountaintop finish. It was the place where the stage got cancelled in 2019 with the landslides when Egan Bernal was on his way to win the Tour. You were out the back, pretty much kilometre one. There was no way you were going to make it to the finish inside the time delay.
No,
Why did you keep going?
Got dropped first kilometre. I'd been really suffering with a knee injury. It was getting worse and worse. I just made it the previous day. So kilometre in, I got dropped. And actually another guy who was with me was Mark Cavendish, and he actually pulled out pretty quickly after that. And there was 3 of us that soldiered on. Then another one of them, he popped off. Then another one, he was gone. I ended up on my own. And about halfway into the stage, I'd already gone over the estimated time cut, 46 minutes. I went, I know I'm never making it. I can hardly pedal with my right leg. The last thing that I ever wanted to do in the Tour, if you've ever watched coverage of guys who pull out, they follow them with the broom wagon. They end up in tears on the side of the road, and then they come and peel their numbers off. They stick on numbers. And they've always got a camera with a mic in here as they peel the numbers. That's not me. I won't do it. Even though I knew I was way outside the time limit, I was going to be out of the race. I said, just as a matter of pride, especially when it comes to the Tour de France, finish what you start. I finished 11 out of the 12 tours that I started. In that one, I said, I may not finish the entire tour, but I will finish this stage on my own, as far down as it takes, and in a way leave the race on my terms. I climbed the last hill, they were packing the barriers, the crowd was gone. I came in and I looked at the clock and I was an hour and 8 minutes behind. And I said, yep, I'm definitely outside the time limit. And I sort of, went to the hotel, which fortunately was very close by, and the team director came in, he said, mate, really sorry to see, you're outside the time limit. I said, yeah, no shit. He said, do you want me to go to the commissaires and ask if they'll, use their discretion to put you back in? I said, absolutely not. I said, tomorrow's only going to be worse. I said, look at my knee, it was like this big. I said, I'm done, I'm out, and I finished the way I wanted to, and now I'm going on holiday.
And I thought that defined Robbie McEwan. He wasn't going to surrender. They were going to have to kick him out. He is one of the greats of not just Australian cycling, but of Australian sport. And he was a guy that when he was at the AIS on the track program, they told him he wouldn't be good enough. He didn't listen. Put your hands together for one of the all-time greats, Robbie McEwan.
Thank you, and at the same time, put your hands together for Matthew Keenan.
Absolutely.